Good morning. Okay, we are in Ezekiel part 2. This is lesson 5A. We're going to do the first 3 days of our homework of lesson 5, which means we will be covering Ezekiel 40, 41, and 42. There, of course, again, is context on this that we have to keep in mind, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to try to bring it to a little bit more personal application for us by taking us into the throne room of God that we have demonstrated to us in the book of Revelation. We have looked at this before, right, when we did our Revelation study. But going into it right now, while we've just finished looking at the amazing details of this book, which are a little bit complicated, right? Was it a little bit daunting for some of you guys? Yeah. Yeah, I know, exactly. And I've done it more than once, so it should have been easier for me this time. But I do think I saw some things more clearly, and then in another area I got a little more confused. So, you know, it's going to be fine though, because here let me usher you in to the throne room that's shown to us in the Revelation course, just as a refresher of your mind of what it is this throne room is all about. And it's just such a beautiful passage. So this is in Revelation chapter, it's in chapter 5. 4 also has a really great one as well, but I want to go into 5 because here it presents to us the Lamb of God, who is Jesus. He is from the tribe of Judah, and he's the lion, and he's the one who will open the seals of the book of the Revelation. This is the precursor to this temple coming on the stage. Okay, so let's look at this in Revelation 5, and starting in verse 6, I'll just read those verses to the end of chapter 5. Starting in 6, and I saw between the throne with the 4 living creatures and the elders a lamb standing as if slain, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out to all the earth. And he came and he took it out of the right hand of him who sat on the throne. And when he had taken the book, the 4 living creatures and the 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, having each a harp of golden bowls full of incense, which are the prayers of the saints. Think of that. The prayer we just had, those prayers are in the bowls that God keeps in the heavenly realm. They sang a new song. So now we're ready for a new song because we're about to enter into this era here. He says, "Worthy art thou to take the book and to break its seals, for thou wast slain and didst purchase for God with thy blood men from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. And thou hast made them to be a kingdom and priests to our God, and they will reign upon the earth." That's us. We will reign upon the earth. And I looked and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, and the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing. And every created thing which is in heaven and on the earth and under the earth and on the sea and all things in them, I heard saying to him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb, be blessing and honor and glory and dominion forever and ever." And the 4 living creatures kept saying, "Amen." And the elders fell down and worshiped. That's what we have to look forward to. That is such a beautiful way to start our look at these very technical details about what we're going to look at. My question, as we start into this, it starts with what this man who comes by vision to Ezekiel, and he tells him a very specific instruction in verse 4. Did you notice the instruction that the man said to him? Somebody read that verse for us.
The man said to me, "Son of man, see with your eyes, hear with your ears, and give attention to all that I'm going to show you. For you have been brought here in order to show it to you. Declare to the house of Israel all that you see."
Wow. For me, that is the contextual setting of why we're going to look at these next few chapters here in the detail that he gives to us. Because otherwise, if you consider that he is telling Ezekiel, he is to give attention to this, and that then once he sees it, he's to tell it. Could you imagine having to remember all this and tell it later? That's a divine inspired writing right there, right? Because I can't even remember an address or a telephone number unless I write it down in the moment I hear it. So I wanted to start us off with that word attention, pay attention. Did anybody do a word study? You did. Yeah. I'm so good. Let's do this one first. I'm just going to put it in green because it is a word study. He says pay attention, or give. He says give attention. Okay, so what was that?
38.
Mm-hmm. Heart, mind, soul, inner person. I think I'll go back here. Okay, heart, mind, soul, inner person. Anything else? That's okay. That was it. Did anybody else look that word up by chance? Give attention. Again, doing inductive Bible studies, sometimes Kay doesn't have us do everything. And I know that right now, our main goal for today is to technically lay out these chapters. And then next week, we're going to get the rest of the lesson. Again, it's going to be a layering for us, which is awesome. And so then next week, we'll get to go in and try to layer in some very interesting details, hopefully, and some of the cross-referencing that she gives to us. But I felt like this was a word that should, as an inductive student, catch your attention. If God himself, through his spokesperson, who he sends to Ezekiel, he says, I want you to give attention to this because now I'm going to require that you give it then to Israel. And he literally lists, he says, see it with your eyes, hear it with your ears, and give attention to all that I am going to show you. So this idea of it, going back then to the heart, the mind, the soul, the inner person, that's pretty specific to an all-consuming kind of an attention, right? Would you say that you had an all-consuming kind of attention as you did your homework this week? I know, me either. I can confess that I got there eventually, probably by last night as I was pondering then the application of this for us, because we have to try to find application in this, because right now it seems real technical and very convoluted with a lot of things that most of us don't care about. It's like take the measurements and go build it and I'm done. I mean, I don't want to hear about it, right? Okay, my definition goes on to say reflection and memory. Okay, so it is your mind. It's about your knowledge and your thinking. But it's also about reflection and memory. It's a determination of will and inclination, a resolution toward that, to be resolved toward it, to be really intently purposeful. Have you ever heard of a purpose-driven life? We've heard of that one before, right? Which we can't say we love that particular book that much, me personally anyway. However, I like the concept of a purpose-driven life. I think that's really kind of what he's really saying right here. Give attention to it, a determination of your will. And it's conscience, the seat of the appetite, as seat of emotions and passions, the seat of courage, and then goes into the heart and the understanding, which has to do with your soul. You know, your connection then with God himself, that's kind of outside of the physical body, of the realm of this physicalness that we all live in. We tend to get more focus on the physical quality of our world because we're physical beings, right? But to transcend beyond that, to go into the realm of the spiritual, make that heart connection with God concerning what he's showing you. So now that we've kind of talked that through, and I'm just going to leave that much heart, mind, soul, inner person actually concludes everything I just expounded on. What things did you draw out of this just by, even if it's the first time you've thought of thinking on this, What do you think God's purpose is in showing so much detail about this temple? What do you think he's doing here? Particularly when you think of it from this perspective, he wants their heart, their mind, their soul, and their inner person to be involved in this attention.
So the first thing I thought of was that's where Jesus is going to rule.
Right,
So, and 8 chapters are devoted to it.
right,
So it has to do with the holiness of who Jesus is.
yeah,
And how we approach him. And how
right.
people in the millennium.
That's a good point. Also, how we approach him. So it's both the knowledge that Jesus himself will occupy that space because he is holy. It must have these qualities of holiness about it that we began to see as we got to the 42. And we'll see it even more when we get into 43. But also the technical details of, pardon? Oh, there's the blood. Oh, yeah. Well, the blood came up because of all the sacrifice. Did the sacrifices blow you all away that there were going to be sacrifices in the millennial?
Well, you told us that.
I know. I'm sorry. I've told you guys a lot of things. I know, and that's the interesting thing about being with someone who's done a lot of these. Because, in particular, for me, my mind went to the Levitical law. And so here's another question to think on this. So what was the purpose for the first temple? What was the question? She's getting her food. What was the purpose for Solomon's temple, or any of them? All of the ones that were the tabernacle, the temple, and then even the second temple. Okay, God was to dwell with them, so there was, yes. But why the sacrifices? Why the candlelight? Why the only entrance? Why the veil? Why the altar of incense? Why the mercy seat?
The sin can't be in the presence of God or vice versa, so it was to protect all the people as they approached God.
Okay, so the temple was to protect people from God. Okay,
Well, no, like, I'm talking about like all the sacrificing and stuff with the blood covering.
okay, okay,
So that you don't get insta-zapped.
okay, got it. Okay, okay, it was a place to meet God. What was the symbolics then of, because this is what we're going to be looking at here. Lots of symbolic things and lots of measurements and exactness of how it's all. When you looked at the temple this week on the whole, what were your kind of your first impressions about a lot of it? First, when you go into the east and you go on to the right and then you go on to the left, did you notice that one repeated phrase he kept saying? The measurements as the gate which faced, they were the same as the others. The same as the others. So what does that impress on you?
Well, when I was going through it, it told me that this is the way to God. And the practical part of it too is that, to me, one of the things I thought about was, it's like, this is what God said it was going to be, and when it becomes, everyone will know that he is God.
Yes.
So, I mean,
Okay, so yeah, in a way, it's just that it's been prophesied, and now here is the reality of it.
But when he gave them all of the instructions of, no matter whether it was cleaning out their house or whatever, but when they came to the temple, all of the instructions were for, this is the way I say that
You must approach me. Okay.
And it's all through Jesus, which is the picture of the sacrifice.
Well, I think you're touching on a really good point, which is there is a way to approach God, and it's not the way we would normally think we could approach God. And as a matter of fact, through the historical record of the Old Testament, we see times when they did not approach God correctly, the way God had instructed, and what happened? People died, right? So in the idea that God has had in the old temple, not, we don't see that obviously here because we're just looking at the structure, but in the old temple, then part of it was to teach the holiness of God. I think that's kind of what Kristen was trying to point at. That was the holiness of God is there. And P.S. and by the way, man, you are not holy. And therefore, there seemed to be barriers that were between us and God to give us the impression and the instruction that he's a holy God and we're not. Because what does that do for a person? Whether you're saved or not saved, what does that do for a person? It humbles you. It should bring you to your knees. And if you're willing to bow your knees, then that's your first entrance into true worship of God and into a true relationship with the Lord, recognizing who you are and who God is. And that's what basically all of the Pentateuch is about, but specifically the Genesis record, who is God and who is man, and who is man in relationship to God. And so when you get into a book like Leviticus, where a lot of those details were given to us about the old temple and how they were to approach God under that Levitical law system, what we see then is there's going to be something similar to that in the future, isn't there? We're not there yet, but there's more to come on this. It's going to layer on top of what we're going to look at today that's going to fill in even more details about, particularly was it in 42 where we ended with the idea where it says that they are the holy chambers, for this is the holy place. And it talked about their garments and and there was instructions on what they could do and could not do. It was really only one little instruction, but there's more to come. So again, it's back to this picture that's going to be apparently important because we're to give attention to this. And Ezekiel needed to pay attention to it. Now, they had a great advantage because they had a memory of their old temple system. And that was greatly abused in their day, totally violated. But they knew what was right, even if they weren't doing it right. So for you and I, we are looking at this temple today, and we're looking at these very rigid kind of points about it. But I want you, as we're going through it, to not forget that in this, what we're seeing is God is presenting to us a spiritual truth message about that era in history. We're not the dispensation of the millennial reign, that time frame, 1,000 years. We're not done with the work of God on this earth. You know, we still have a ministry to do. We're going to serve the Lord. Do you remember the Matthew 25 and on, where it talks about, I'm going to give them charge over certain cities, and some are going to do this, and some are going to. So you and I will have a work. We will have missionary work to do yet, because will everyone during that 1,000-year reign be followers of God? No. How do we know that? From what we did last week with our timeline, how do we know that the millennial reign is going to result at the end of it with a war, another war called Gog and Magog, a second war? There's a war that Ezekiel speaks of that inaugurates this millennial kingdom that we're going to be looking at here with this temple, which also, did you notice that this is sequential then? That Ezekiel started with what they did before, what Israel did and how God judged them, the promise of him bringing them back. Ezekiel 37, the dry bones come to life. We've seen that, 1948. And now we're waiting for this time that Ezekiel says in 38 and 39, there's going to be a war. The whole world is going to come against little tiny Israel. And that is, this man Gog from the land of Magog is going to come. Well, at the end of the millennial reign, after all of this, 1,000 years of it, there's going to be another war. So does that help you perspective-wise to say, why the temple?
Because of sin, because of unbelief.
Yeah, because there's still going to be unbelievers on this earth. And can the unbeliever come into the presence of a holy God? No. So there has to be a demonstration and a teaching mechanism in place. That is, in fact, what the temple was. So what you didn't touch on when I asked this question is all these symbolisms, all these symbolics, all these required sacrifices and actions, the design purpose of them in the first temple was to bring people to God, to let them see they were unholy, they had need for salvation, for forgiveness of sin. The forgiveness of sin only comes through the shedding of blood. Jesus is that. In this temple, that's going to be made as a known. But there's going to be many out there that have never had that encounter yet, because they're going to be born during the 1,000-year reign. And they are going to need to know about the holiness of God in the same way we do in this generation. I was telling Celeste on the phone yesterday, I think it was yesterday, and I said, isn't it interesting? God promised us in this book of Revelation new manna for the overcomer. And my theory is that new manna will be a new scripture. God is going to give us a new written word, and guess what we're going to need in the 1,000-year reign? Teachers to teach that word of God. And you all are equipping yourself to be qualified to do that. I mean, if God so gifts you in that way and so challenges you in that way to do it, you are the ones who are showing yourself diligent to study the word of God, to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not be ashamed, who accurately handles the word of truth. That is what you're doing right here in this class. And knowing that in the temple to come, we have a duty before God to teach the holiness of God. And that as God gave this vision to Ezekiel, one of the things he's really showing to us for our generation is that when that temple comes, it still has a design purpose similar to what the old temple had. Okay? The distinction is Jesus himself will be there. We're going to see that in the next chapter that we get to. Okay, so it's tools for lessons of faith and holiness, okay? Pointing to God's grace and his sacrificial lamb. So will we see that through those sacrifices again? Now, for those of us already in faith and those of us who are the bride of Christ, who come with him, we're already in our glorified bodies. We don't need to be taught that. We've already accepted that. But the world out there will. Bye, you guys. Have a fun trip. We need to know how to approach a holy God. So this is going to teach that. That system is going to teach that to them. And it's also going to be a constant reminder to us. You know, one of the things that we have to remember is when we get our glorified bodies, it does not make us God. We're still finite beings with only a capacity to a certain measure, right? And the idea that we'll have a system in place around us where it's constantly reminding us and teaching us and refining us. You know, we are totally forgiven. We are going to be totally sanctified. We are going to have the new body, the glorified body. We will be like him. We will see him face to face. And yet we will still need the disciplines of understanding reverence before God. That we not get to a place of it becoming common, rather the profane, in other words, rather than the holy. Isn't that interesting to you, thinking on that a little bit? Okay, understanding our sin and its consequences is another thing that the temple did for us. The Levitical laws, what the Levitical laws taught Israel in the Old Testament, I believe are going to be similar to what this temple will do for us in the millennial. Okay? So I say all that to say, when he said pay attention, give attention to this, and he meant his heart, his soul, his mind, his inner person. Can you see now how reflecting on this and going into that spiritual place changes your attitude about what we're looking at here? And so I say all that, I think, as hopefully a word of encouragement to you. There's a few fun things that we're going to look into here. All right, now, let me get a drink. I want to start with just a little bit of historical context on this, not a review, from this text. Okay, time reference in verse 1. Tell me what you know about that. And where's my book? This is it. Yeah. This is it. Okay. Give me your time reference on this. Okay, in the 25th year of our exile. So what we know from so far in here is in Ezekiel 10, the glory of the Lord had departed the temple. We know in Ezekiel 8 through 11, the totality of that, Ezekiel saw the people profaning the temple, right? Remember they had carvings that they had put on. They actually even turned their back to God in this temple and worshiped the sun. I remember all those, it was just horrible. Okay, in Ezekiel 24, in the 9th year of King Jehoiakim's exile, Babylon's third siege came. That was when that kind of takes us to the end of those first 24 chapters, which covers what God was doing with Israel because of her unbelief. How he removed from her what? What did he actually do in conclusion to that? What is actually, to this very day, what did God do to Israel? He took her off her land and what? Took his glory from them. No more glory in the temple. What else? He scattered them many times, actually. Isn't that interesting? They weren't scattered just this one time in history. They were also scattered again in 70 AD. And that one lasted almost 2,000 years before they came back in 1948. Now, in Ezekiel 24:21, the reason he did all this is, what had Israel done? The idols?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They turned their back on him.
Mm-hmm. Turned their back on him. They had the idol worship. And God says, I am doing this not for your sake, Israel, but what? Huh? They broke covenant. Exactly. That's the bottom line. And in breaking covenant, what did they do to his name? They profaned his holy name. And he says then in the chapters that follow that, I will vindicate my holy name. Not for your sake, Israel, not because you're so great, but because I had concern for my name. And he had concern for it before also the nations. And so then we entered into that next segment on the book that covers how he's going to also judge the nations. But the interesting thing is he said also all the way back, now I've forgotten what book, which chapter 28 or something, where it talked about he doesn't desire that any perish, but he wants them to repent and turn to him, right? He desires that none perish. Ezekiel 33, that's where we see this runner come from as a survivor from the fall and give that report. And then in Ezekiel 36, he concludes again, I will vindicate my holy name. So we have that history going on there. And then after that, we see him fall again in 70 AD after Jesus comes. Now, why might be the reason that God dispersed them and destroyed that temple in 70 AD? Because they don't need the temple anymore. Why was the temple not necessary for Israel specifically at that time in history? Because their Messiah had come. But they were rejecting him. So what was necessary? Yeah.
Maybe they'll see.
If I take away their temple and all the requirements that I have always had for them, will they not understand there's a new covenant in place? What had Ezekiel 36 promised would happen in that day? I will make a new covenant. I will give them my spirit. I will remove their heart of stone. I will give them a heart of flesh. They will be my people. I will be their God. That was the promise when the new covenant would come. So by removing the temple in 70 AD, God let them know what happened with Jesus on the cross inaugurated a new covenant. This temple worship system that I gave specifically for Israel as a nation is no longer needed. You are now in a new covenant by faith through Jesus Christ. And now I have the law written on your heart, not on tablets of stone. And we call this the royal law, right? Where he says there are two things, is what Jesus preached. Two things fundamentally that you must do as a law before God, as Christians. What is that? Very good. You got it, girl. All right. So this is really interesting just to kind of see how history is unfolding and how God is doing this. And why would he remove the temple? And why did he make them go into exile? Because they weren't following Jesus, our God. They weren't being obedient to the law that they had to begin with. So God needed to take care of that business in order to try to get their attention that Jesus was their Messiah and they were now in a new covenant if they so chose to come and to enter. All right, so that is one piece of this. Then, okay, so that gives us the time reference here, which is 573 BC in the 25th year, right? Also, he gives us a month and a day on that. What do you know about that month and that day? It's the first month and the 10th day.
What depends on the calendar, right?
Well, okay, there we go. We're in complication because of calendars, but if we just assume it's the first month and the 10th day, and in a Hebrew mind, what happens on the first month and the 10th day? Of Nisan? It's the Passover. Very good. You're talking about Passover. Very interesting strategic timing on this, because the purpose of the Passover was also to show the shedding of blood and the forgiveness of sin, and the idea that they're in their captivity in Babylon because of their sin, and that God would give this vision to them. And the vision does what for them? What has happened to their temple? It's gone now. So now they're in their captivity. Now it's time for Passover on this particular year. And God says, now, Ezekiel, I want you to pay attention to all that I'm going to give to you. I'm going to give attention to this. And then I want you to convey this to the people. What would this vision do for those people who are sitting in exile off their land and their temple has been destroyed? Whoa. Hope, 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 hope. So if you ever wondered why this segment division talks about the hope of their future, the hope for Israel's future, it's because this is where they are at. God gives them a vision of something that they know is not there yet. One of the reasons they know it's not there yet is because of the distinctions that are within it. And we'll talk about those. Hopefully I can find that list I have somewhere. I'll find it when I get time. But those distinctions for them would be, I'm certainly thinking, head scratching. Because remember, Jesus hadn't even come to the first temple yet, right? So they're going to have a temple rebuilt. Now, I think the interesting thing would be, well, Ezekiel, you said it was going to be dead, and then it wasn't. And interesting to me is how this is going to probably affect the idea and the thinking of many in that day, who then became skeptics and naysayers. Well, it's not the way Ezekiel said, so he was a false prophet. But what they hadn't done is move far enough down the line in history to get to that place where this temple is being presented to us. Okay, so besides it being Passover, the beginning of Passover, this man right here, his name is 𝐏𝐚𝐫𝐭, or 𝐿𝐴𝐵. I don't know how this, it's a Hebrew name. He's a rabbi. He wrote this beautiful book. If anybody's interested in purchasing it, it's awesome, but it's still even complicated. Did you all, when you were looking at it, were you going, oh, that's clear? I was going, okay, I'm a little confused. First of all, he's Hebrew, so everything's kind of backwards. And so you're like, okay, this is crazy, okay? But he does do a really good job of drawing out pictures. And if you ever get to a place where you do know what you're looking for, the diagrams would probably make sense to us. And I'm not there yet. But I did go back and read it. Now, one of the things, though, that I did find very interesting was the fact that this Rabbi 𝐏𝐴𝐵 Chlorphini, does anybody know how to pronounce that? Okay. He calculates, because he's Hebrew, and they have a dating system. We actually know that. You can go online and date what year is this in the Hebrew calendar, right? And it'll give you this year's year according to their calculations. Well, according to his calculations, and you might want to write this on your observation worksheet, just put Rabbi Chlorphini, Chlorphene, Chlorphini, that he calculates the year of this is 3352. And he finds that significance because if that's true, and if his calculations are correct, it is a Jubilee year. Does everybody kind of know what that means?
Saying that this 573 is this 3352.
3352 is 573. 573 is another calendar.
For what's happened right here, this 25th year of exile,
Yep.
saying is the 3352.
He's saying, yes. And so he puts this vision at 3352, okay? So if the vision is in 3352, if he's correct, and if he's calculated his years correctly, he says this should be a Jubilee year. If it's a Jubilee year, what do you know about the Jubilee year? What happens every 50 years for Israel? They have people living together in community, right? Some people make bad decisions. They get themselves in a pickle. They have to go into debt.
Basically frees the debtors. It gives the land, all the land a rest. Everybody rests. It's just kind of like
It's a reset. That's a great way of saying it. I love that. It's a reset.
It's free. No more. Your debt is paid. And
Yes. So it's a reset button. The year of Jubilee. Anyone who got into debt and ended up, if I owe you, Carol, $10 trillion and you backed me on it and you got me out of trouble, I owe you. I'm basically indebted to you. I'm your slave. But on the year of Jubilee, you have to set me free. And the system is set up that you make that decision based on how many years do I have to the Jubilee, and you calculate, do you really want to loan me $20 or $10 trillion, depending on how many years I've got to pay you back. So you would have to gauge that in your Hebrew mind, and that would be part of the bargain that went between man and man. And so in order to have, like we go into debt to our banks and to our credit cards, right? And we don't have this system in place anymore. But similar to that, the Hebrews had an indebtedness that they could pay off over a certain period of time. But every Jubilee year, every 50th year, it was debt-free, which is really interesting. The other thing is it does set the slaves free. For anyone who ended up becoming totally enslaved, not just financially enslaved, but physically enslaved, and they had to give up their land to that person. So that person incorporated your land into being their land. Now they own it until the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee, whoever is alive of that family bloodline, the land goes back to them. Okay? So think of that in perspective too. They're in captivity. Their temple is gone. They're off their land. If this is a year of Jubilee, what is God promising to them in this vision? A reset, a total reset at this time. Whenever this temple is going to come about, Israel is going to have a reset. They're going to get their land back. He says the slaves are set free and the land is restored to its rightful owner. Well, the real rightful owner is God himself, right? But the people, by God's grace, get to enjoy that particular land. So it will go back to, you're giving me a look. Are you following? That they get a reset and they get all their land back in this? Because it's a promise of one day Israel as a people being set free from their slavery, being put back on their land and their land being given back to them. And also they will have their temple again one day. So it's a threefold promise if in fact this is a Jubilee year. And it really makes sense. When he said that, I went, that really makes sense that God would specifically pick this year to give this vision to Ezekiel so that it would be a word of hope to the people who are in their captivity and have no land and have no temple. That I'm going to promise you freedom. You're going to get restored to your land. You're going to get your temple back. You're going to get a better temple. Look at this thing. Yeah. Pay attention here. And you're going to be free. And the freedom you're going to have is to be my people. I will be your God and you will be my people. Woo, that's a lot of cool stuff in verse 1. We haven't even started yet. Aren't you already happy you came? All right. Okay, now we get to go into the sticky details, okay? Let's start in Ezekiel 40. And I am not going to write a lot up here. I'm going to give paragraph titles for you so that hopefully we won't have to use a lot of our time. But we see in verse 1 to 4. Now, let's get our main theme up here first. Let's do that. Let's title it. What did you title Ezekiel 40 on your observation worksheet? I know, it was really hard. I must have rewritten it 15 times. It's okay. Whatever you got, somewhere in the ballpark. What's on your page?
Really limit, and it's not good. Vision.
Okay.
The temple.
Okay, that's great. Vision of a temple. That works. All right, there you go. Okay, we'll add that in. Vision of, I'm going to put Israel's future temple. And that is very important in the perspective that they are in at the moment that they're in history, where they're off their land, no temple, and they, it's gone, it's been destroyed. Okay, so a vision for a future temple for Israel. So then in paragraph 1 through 4, the introduction into that is a couple of points there. Where is he taken to, and who is the one that is going to instruct?
Very high mountain.
Okay, and where? So he's taken to Israel on a very high mountain, and to whom?
A man whose appearance.
Yeah. A man with a measuring rod. Okay. So he's the one that then says, pay attention or give attention Number one. And then he says to him, declare it to Israel. All I show you. Okay? All right. Any other things that you saw in there that you had question about? Or that you want to make a point about before we move on? I mean, this is how quickly we're going to be going through these. What do you see? Anything? No? We kind of did talk about it, right? We went into the word attention. We see he's supposed to remember this and tell it. That, to me, that's a really big indication that this is something important. This is very much like the book of Revelation or like the book of Daniel, any of the prophecies that were given through God's prophets. Like we said in that past chapter last week, are you the one of whom I spoke through the prophets to Israel? And then in the end he says, it will come. It's that day, it is coming. And here he's saying, now I want you to declare this to them because this is also coming. Okay, verse 5 then, I separated all by itself before I went into 6 because to me it had to be. Because what is shown to you in verse 5? A wall. And concerning that wall, what instructions are we learning about? Are there measurements there? Is there measurements in verse 5? The thickness and the height of the wall. Okay, so he saw a wall. And he saw. I'm going to put this. I'm going to start with he saw the temple, right? And an outer wall. We're going to see that word outer a lot and inner. Yeah. All around it, right? Is that correct? Is that sufficient? That's a good title for that verse? He saw the temple and an outer wall. And you're right. He measures just the wall itself, its thickness and height. Okay. Verse 6, then I went 6 to 16 on the next part. So I know I often do not follow K, but I had to separate that because I felt like it was talking about the wall itself, but then what starts in verse 6? The gate. The gate. And everything that's associated with the gate, okay? So what gate is it, by the way? Did we give a directional thing on this? The east gate. So this is the east, and I'm going to call it outer gate. East gate, outer court entrance. Okay, and what kind of things does he detail in there? You said, what did you say a minute ago? You said, okay, there's guard rooms in that gate. What else? There's a porch, guard rooms.
Side pillars.
Pillars. A barrier wall. Threshold, porch, and then verse 16, shuttered windows. Okay, so all that is associated with this gate that's at the east of this temple. So it's the temple, it's the east gate that leads to the outer court entrance, but it's about the gate. So you could just title it the east gate if you want. He saw the temple and an outer wall all around it was that title. This one is the east gate. You could go on for your own personal clarification and say it's the east gate that leads you into the outer court entrance. I did it that way. And the reason I did is, does it give us anything else about that? What about if it leads to the court, what else is at that east gate opposite the outer court entrance? Outer, inner, outer, inner, outer, inner. What's the inner to the east gate? Another gate. That's an inner east gate. Right. He doesn't cover that, though. Did you notice? He doesn't pick that up until you get to verse 32. Did you catch that? That there's a pickup? He starts with it. Now, in the rest of them, he actually combines them. He talks about the outer and the inner, and the outer and the inner. But with the east gate, he starts with the outer, gives you the outer gate entrance to that outer court, but he doesn't address the inner court entrance at all until later. He comes back around to it.
Isn't that similar to what happened when we had division of the actual temple, when it was coming in?
Yeah, it was
There
convoluted.
was the outer, and then there was the inner, and we're like, where are we? Okay, so it's pretty.
So I did kind of pick up on that. So I made some points on my chart for you all, but how do you enter into this east gate? What's there? Did you notice? In verse 6, how do you get there?
Steps.
Up the steps. So there's steps that and it's specific. How many steps? See if I can find it.
It doesn't say right here, it said, thought it said it somewhere else.
Yeah, maybe I got it from somewhere else.
7 steps? No. I think, 8 steps. For the outer court.
Verse 6. Then the gate which faced east, went up its steps and measured the threshold. Okay, well, we'll skip that part, but it's steps. Okay, we'll skip that part for right now. Okay, and we have the gate, guard rooms, porches, pillars. What about ornamentally?
The palm trees.
Did you notice that almost at the end of every single thing, we talk about palm trees being everywhere?
Yes.
Interesting subject of palm trees. I'm going to stop and talk about that in a moment. I have a lot of information that I can give it. I don't know how much Kay is going to take us into that in the second part of our lesson, but I'm going to cover it a little bit with us in a bit. Okay, then then he says, I put this as a little note. Just for me is the exact measurements of each are recorded. For each of the for each aspect of the gate. Okay, and everything else that pertains to it. Okay, now we're going to go to 7 to 19. Now where are we?
17.
Oh, did I say 7? I meant 17. 17 to 19. This is how I get messed up even at home. Get my chart all wrong, but this says 17 here. Okay, where are we in 17 to 19?
The outer court.
We're in the outer court. And what's in the outer court?
Chamber.
Chambers and
Pavement.
a pavement. That's it. Outer court. So now we're at the east gate that leads to the outer court, right? Now we're inside the east gate in the inner court. All right. And there we see 30 chambers. And we see a pavement. Any thoughts on any of that you want to discuss? How far does that pavement go, by the way? Yeah. So the pavement that is the lower pavement was by the side of the gates, plural. So apparently that pavement doesn't just run in front of the east gate. It must go on, right? Corresponding to the length of the gates. Yes. So in other words, that pavement goes all the way around the front 3 portions of the temple. What we are looking at here is the east gate, then we're going to address the north gate and the south gate. And so this pavement runs all around that. The back part of it is distinct, right? Did you notice that? Okay. All right, so 17 to 19, good. Now 20 to 23. Where are we now? We're at the north gate. And I'm going to put this plural. The north gates. And the reason I do that is the first one is talked to us in verse 20, and what is it?
The outer court.
The outer court gate. We see that in verse 20. Okay, and he goes on again. How does it repeat what you've just seen from the east gate? What is it, that gate? Stuff. Oh, steps. I thought you said stuff. But that was a good answer. I like stuff better than steps. No, okay. Okay, so there's, what else?
Steps and more palm trees.
Yeah, there's windows and guard rooms and pillars and porches. And what about decoration in 22? More palm trees, right? And then it goes on to say, and I just kind of gave myself a little squiggly mark on my page underneath it. Instead of underlining it, I squigglied it just so it stood out. The same measurements as the gate which faced toward the east. So in other words, what are we seeing then at this point? Symmetrical. Symmetry, orderliness, precision, mirror images, shadowing. But it has to, for a person who is what do you call those, minimalists. People who are minimalists would really like this house because it's like so symmetrical that if you need that in your life, I'm a clutter person. I have a lot of decorations, lots of rugs, lots of whatever. But this one shows to us just the clean, straight lines, the calmness of repetition. But I tell you what, if you ever got in there in the dark and you didn't know which gate you were at, you'd be in trouble because they're all alike. Okay, except for location, location, location. So, and it says the same as the east gate, right? The measurements. So that's what I did with it. And then the second part of it, starting in 23, is what? So we have an outer court, now we have an inner court gate. That's on the north, right? 23. Okay. And the gate, and then it was interesting because it talked about the distance between these two gates, 100 cubits. Did anybody look at those measurements to see what that equated to by chance?
It's on our map here.
Okay, tell me what
175 feet.
175 feet. That's a lot. How long is that? Wonder how long. I wish I had a foot thing to see if from this gate to that, for this wall to that wall, if that would be about right. I don't know. Not long enough, huh? Has to be bigger. Whoa. Think of that. I think this is 20 feet. Oh my gosh. It'd take you half an hour to walk from one gate to the next. Okay, so double this. I think my husband was saying 100 cubics was like a football field. I don't know. Anyway, I didn't go into that. As you can see, that's something I didn't do.
A cubit is about 18 inches.
Yeah.
So you're like a foot and a half, basically.
Yeah. It's a long way from one gate to the other, though. It's not like they're real close to one another. There's a great hall, which means this whole open space of what is called the outer court is very large, right? They have a lot of space from that court to that court and lots of walking. How many people do you suppose you could get into that kind of an area? It would be amazing. Okay, so that's just for perspective and to think on. It just kind of helps you grab a hold of it. Now let's go to 24 to 31. And truly, if you have the time and the patience to want to figure, I had said to my husband I would like to have had him help me take a piece of rope and cut a string the length of all this so that I could demonstrate it for you all. And I ran out of time. This took me much, much longer to do than I thought it would. And it was so complicated. And I got to say, I did find a video, which I'm going to send to all of you. Send it to you? No, I sent it to you. Did you like the video? Did you watch it?
I watched the first part of it. It looked like it was
Okay.
because it was showing like the picture and the measuring.
Okay, exactly. So here's what I want to tell you about this video that I'm going to send out. It's literally a walkthrough on exactly what's being said in each of these chapters.
That would be nice.
If you look in the upper left corner, it will tell you what verse they're in. So it'll say chapter 40, verse 2, and then it's showing you the measurements. Then it says 40, verse 7, Now 40 verse 15, and so it's showing you exactly where you are, and you can get a visual on a lot of it. But I also found it very helpful to go online and find chart drawings, various kinds, where Kay gave us this one, right? Whoops, this one right here, which was very helpful to begin with. But then it got complicated, especially when I got to 42. I couldn't figure out what it was talking about. So I found this one, and this one is affixed to my chart. So if you will open my chart and print it out, which is what I keep asking everyone to do because I think it's helpful, print out my charts and put them straight into your homework, right where your homework is, and then you'll have it. But this one was so helpful. When we get to 42, I'll readdress this one. But these charts are so helpful. But that video I'm going to send out.
The video is 3D.
And the video is only,
So you're gonna like,
it's a 3D video, and it's only 12 minutes long. 12 minutes. You can do it. So sit down, put it on your big screen if you can, because it's really helpful to see it. Have your remote handy to pause things. And then what I say is open your observation worksheet, which we will now have outlined and have it pretty well compartmentalized, and just follow along, and then you'll say, oh, that's what it's saying. Because that's what I kept doing, and I kept backing up and going for it, backing up. I spent 3 hours on that 12-minute video because I kept going back to it to say, what is he saying here? And when I hit 42, I got really confused, and he really goes quickly through those last couple of chapters and doesn't give you a lot. So this other map was so helpful to me, and I gave it to you, and it's right here on page 3 on my chart for you, okay? So if you can't find it yourself, you'll have this one to look at. Okay.
Caught up on the altar, because that to me was so confusing.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't print out any of the diagrams that I could find, so I made my own diagram.
Good for you. Woohoo!
The height to the top, and I couldn't believe this, it said 11 cubics, and it's 19.25 feet tall.
Wow.
Just the altar.
Do you know how many times in Scripture has it says they went up to Jerusalem? Now you're getting the concept of going up, what that means. Even if they were in the other direction, even if it was going north, they still said you're going up.
so it said 100 cubic feet is 175 feet. Which
Yes.
takes 2 to make a football field length.
Oh, 2 football field lengths.
No,
Think-
it takes 2 of them to make a football field. So half.
Oh, half a football field. Okay, so half of a football field. That's still quite a lot. That's how wide the corridor from the inner court gate to the inner court gate. Oh, no, the outer court gate to the inner court gate. Sorry, I need
So it's a 50-yard line, basically.
outer court and then the inner court. Yeah. So it's one half of a football field,
So it's like
100 cubics. Thank you, Celeste. That was helpful. And I meant to do it. I just totally forgot until just this moment. I meant to go back to it. Okay. 24 to 31, where are we now? We were at the north gate. Now where are we? We're at the south gate. Can you say same verse? Second chorus, same verse? What is it? I'm Henry VIII, I am. Right, second verse, same as the first. Okay. I felt like that when I was doing this.
This vision is of the temple in Revelation 21.
Well, Revelation, it's really talking about the Holy of Holies there, but yes,
Right, okay.
which we aren't there yet.
Because it says, what I just found is that it's 12,000 furlongs, which is approximately 1,500 miles.
that's huge.
The totality of the temple, 1,500. Yes, which is honestly, okay, so if the whole temple itself, think about it. First of all, how big is Israel today? It's not even big enough to hold the temple. Think of what it's going to be like in that day when Jesus is ruling and reigning from that temple on this massive piece of land. And then wait till we get to the next part where outside of the temple, on all 4 sides, are the lands allotted to the Israelite nation. That's how big Israel is going to be in that day. If that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what does. And later we're going to see that the water from this temple goes down to the Araba Sea, right, the Dead Sea, and it's going to make it fresh water, fresh living water. We'll talk about that later, but oh my gosh, this is just beautiful. Okay, so 24 to 31 is the south gate. Again, we have two portions to it, right? In verse 24, what? Does anybody see it? In verse 24, what does it say about the outer gate? According to the same measurements, okay? It's porches, it's windows, 7 steps going up to it. And then in verse 27, what does he say? The inner court. Okay, so we have the outer court gate, and then number 2, an inner court gate. And that's in 27. Okay, I think I put the wrong one on my page. I should have put 27. Okay. All right. And at that gate, again, what do we see? The symmetry again. Pillars, porches, windows, like the others, okay? Same measurements in verse 29. Same measurements. That's where I put that little squiggly line. The same measurements as previously.
Except 8 steps.
Oh, yeah, except 8 steps this time, right. We got 8 steps in verse 31, okay? Now we have 32. I think we're going to get through this. We moved it fast. I know, it is a miracle. I'm a miracle every week, aren't I? Even the weeks I don't think I can get through it. Okay, 32 to 34 then. Now where are we? Back to.
Inner court east.
We're on the east gate. This time we're at the inner court of the east gate. So we started over here, the east gate, the outer court entrance. Now we're at the east gate, inner court gate. All right, so I'm going to do this again. Outer, inner. Now we've got back to the outer. Over here was the outer. Do you see it? How you've gone back to the east gate again, to the beginning, so to speak. And now it's going to give you details about the inner court gate, and what does it tell us? Same measurements, same qualities, same stuff. I like that. That's about the best way to say that, right? That's in verse 33. We also see 32. It's porches, 33 and 34. Covered the same stuff. Okay. All right, I love it. All right, 35 to 37. Where are we now? Oh, I've got so many more. I got to have more space. I got to write small on this. Where are we back to on 35 to 37? The north gate. Now we're back to the north gate. I think part of the complication for me on doing this, trying to parse it out, was because it kept moving. And sometimes they go back to the same gate again and readdress it and give different details or whatever. He seemed to be focusing on other things. But there seems to be, and I don't know what it is, but the pattern of entering in and then going around and going here and then coming back and then going over. And I don't know if they crossed through to get to the south gate, or did they come out and come all the way around to go to that south gate? I don't know. But if to cross through, they'd have to go through the inner sanctuary, the inner court. I don't think that would be an appropriate way to visually show this, because there's a distinction of the inner court, right, which is that it's holy, and that only certain people are going to be allowed to be within there, right? Who will be allowed to be within the inner court? The priests and those singers who are also priests, right? And anyone who's attending to the altar and to Christ himself as a servant to him. So I think they have to come back out and then come back around. So it just seems like there's this coming in and going out and then going back around here. And, and so I don't know what the pattern is exactly. That part I didn't have completely figured out.
If it was a vision, they may have been teleported.
That's true, but I do think there was. I think the Jews would know what this is. I think they would understand. You can't cross through there. You have to go back out and come around because of the holiness of the inner court. So I think they would have, the teleporting thing sounds great. But I think that there's actually a reason why he says now we're going to the north gate, but he doesn't say we cross through, and he just assumes you know how you get there.
Somewhere in here, he's lifted by the Spirit, isn't he?
That was at the very beginning how he got into the vision in Israel, yes. Okay, so now let's look at 38 to 43. Where are we now?
Chamber.
Yeah, okay. We're at the north gate here in 30. Oh, I see what I'm doing. Okay. We're at hold on. The north gate. Okay, so it's just the north gate, same measurements. Now we're going to get some details about what's within the north gate at this point. Now we're ready to look at the north gate inner chambers, right? Okay, that's in 38 to 43. So it talks about anything you want to say about there. What kind of things did you see in that? And it's distinct, right? Did you notice it's different? The other, it's not talking about porches and windows and all that. What is it giving you?
First thing is there's tables where they slaughter the sacrifices.
Oh, interesting. Tables for slaughtering sacrifices. In 38, a chamber to rinse the offerings. Also, when you get all the way down to 42, tables for burning offerings and instruments to slaughter them with. So you have a specific table. So it sounds to me like at my house. This is how we work it at my house. You walk through the door, there's a place for your keys. And if you don't put it there, it's your own fault. You can't find your keys later. Because I gave you a place to put your keys. And my daughter, when she was living with us, she'd run through the house. Where's my keys? Where's my keys? I'm going, did you put them in the box? Yeah. So, but that seems to be what's going on here. There's a very precise place, a place for everything and everything in its place. Is that what the impression is that you got on this? Okay. Good. 44 to 47. So we looked at the inner gate chambers, and this was for sacrificial stuff. And things like tables, etc., right, for sacrifices and tables. What is the next part of the inner court information? We probably could have actually joined these two paragraphs together. The inner court, and done number 1, the stuff for the sacrifices, and number 2, what? Chambers for the priests. I just saw that I could have done that. That's what I did up here. Because I joined these paragraphs together because it had a part A, a part B, a part A, a part B. Here it just talks about the inner court. Now it goes again, a part A, a part B. I should have done it that way when it hit here, this part of it. Okay, but I titled this the inner court north and south sides. And what was the point in this, showing you north and south? Mm-hmm.
In there, yeah, one of them had, the north is for priests who keep charge of the altar.
I love that. That was very interesting in that part, and we aren't going to cover it today, and hopefully in our homework that she's going to give us, she'll talk about this. If not, I recommend you take 5 minutes to look it up if you're interested, right? Who are these sons of Zadok, who are from the sons of Levi, and how does this compare to the Old Testament temple worship and who got to do what compared to what's going on here and now? Is there a difference or is it the same? Interesting, right? Also, chambers for the singers. So now, where were these chambers again? Where are these chambers? Number 1 for priests. And number 2 for singers. Right? And where is it in relationship to the this gate?
Is the chamber for the priest, is it the same chamber for the priest and the singer? Because
She doesn't have it on there, but no, obviously they have their own chambers. And one of the things that I did notice is, one of the things I did notice was, and what I was trying to point out here, how it shows you north and south sides, and they mirror one another. Right. They're the same on both sides. So there's chambers over here for singers, there's chambers over here for singers, there's chambers over here for priests, there's chambers over here for priests. And they face the inner court so that they are actually, when they sing, who are they singing to then? To the temple, to the worship center, the sanctuary in the middle where is the Holy of Holies. So I thought that was really interesting. And you're right, Carol, it's not on there. It drove me crazy.
she doesn't show a way to get into these chambers either.
Well, the gate is right there, so there has to be an entrance. And it might even say later. But you know what? My thing is, at the end, I finally pulled back and said, that doesn't matter. What I know is where the priests and the singers are is in the inner chamber, which puts them adjacent to the Holy of Holies.
In that book, leafing through it, where it talks about, it has a page with a picture of the singers, there's a zillion of them.
Yes, yes. Okay, remember what we're going to see next is the chambers have how many layers? How many levels? 3 tiers.
Yeah.
And it goes the whole length of it. And when you think about how big the football field is, how many chambers are there?
Right? The whole thing is a cube, like the.
Okay, and that is actually what it did say on there was
1,500 miles in each direction.
in verse. Look at verse 47. Yeah, look at in verse 47. It says he measured the court, and what is it? A perfect square. 100 cubits long and 100 cubits wide. So again, a half of a football field, is that what we said? Half a football, half a football, half a football. Have you guys been to a high school graduation this year where you sat in the stadiums around the football field? That gives you a little idea in your head of what you're talking about here for the inner court where the sanctuary is. All around it are basically bleachers, not really, but it's tiered dwelling places and places where they do their function, their required service to the Lord. And one of the things specifically is that it talks about that these chambers specifically are for those who are going to keep charge of the temple and the priests who are going to keep charge of the altar, and then there's the singers who basically will sing. Singing praises. And when we read out of Revelation, it talked about the ones who are before the throne, and they say, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who is, who was, who is to come. And they never stop singing this. Those are the singers in the tabernacle, in the heavenly realm that we see in Revelation, mimicked right here. Designated singers who never stop singing. Could you imagine me going to work in the morning and you get to sing for I don't know how many hours, but you sing, and it's a constant singing of praises before God. That's just, I'm just like, I cannot wait to see this. This is going to be so cool. I hope we get to see in there. I don't know how we'll do that, but.
Okay, so what are the 30 chambers that are around the edges? I thought were the 3-story ones, but what are those for? Didn't really say.
Okay. Let me show, yes. And the ones on the outside, I remember looking at something and it just said storage. So it's probably supplies and food and things that are being brought in for the daily living of all these people. So the people and the supplies get delivered to the front gate. They go into those inner chambers around the outside wall. Then inside are these other areas next to the temple that we're talking about. Do you see these two blue buildings on each side of where the temple is on this picture? Can you see it? There's one here and there's one here. Those are the chambers for the singers and the priests. It's not on your picture. I know. That's why it's helpful to research and find more pictures. I happen to stumble onto it. God gives me good things. Listen, I have a free website for clip art for Christian stuff. And all I have to do is go into the search bar, type in Ezekiel chapter 41, boom. I open it up, and there's picture after picture. Some of them are clip art that are cute to put on the front of a page of something. But some of them are things like this. Or I got another one here, too, on here for you. What we're going to talk about next is the altar that will be in the holy place. Okay, so there's 2 altars in this temple, right? Okay. All right, so that takes care of that. Now, did I get it to the end? Okay, I got one more, and I have no room. Okay, I'm going to put it over here. Okay, I'm just going to draw a line right here. I thought I gave myself enough room, but obviously I wrote too big. Okay, I could have done it if I had squeezed it up a little bit. All right, the last paragraph is 48 and 49. And that's the porch to the temple. And the porch of the temple has a stairway, and it has side pillars. That's all it tells us at that point. Just looking at it, that's what you see, side pillars and a stair. It has to be ominous to look at it, just to stand there. You know, I look at my stairs at home sometimes and think, can I climb those stairs again, right? This is going to be mind-boggling to us. All right, any questions on that first chapter? Did we do okay with getting it kind of unraveled for you? A little bit? Well, what I wanted to do was make it so precise without all the details that you could see the pattern of where you're flowing. You're looking at the outer wall and the temple itself as a complex. That's why he said he looked at it and it looked like a city to him. It was huge. Then he sees the east gate wall, which is the outer entrance. Then he goes to the east gate of the inner court where the chambers are. He goes to the north gates, inner and outer, the south gates, outer and inner, the east gate. Now he goes to the inner east gate. Now he goes and talks about the north gate, gives you those measurements. And then he talks about the chambers that are there. And then the last one is the porch that takes you to the temple. So it kind of gives you the bigger flow of just the layout, basically. You could just say the structural layout of the temple is given to us in this first thing, right? Now we go to 41. Now, Celeste had asked me a question about 41. That word nave. It got complicated, right? There's the nave, there's the temple. Then it talks about the inner house. It talks about, it did mention the sanctuary also. So then, so in other words, it has different words for different things. How would you resolve this? If you were looking at me like that, what did you do to solve that problem? What did you do to solve your problem where you were going, I don't know what it's saying?
Well, some of the things are called, like the nave is the holy place, and sometimes the temple is just the holy and the most holy. And
Thank you.
sometimes it's a whole
Thank
complex.
you. Thank you. So how do you resolve your problem? No? Context is always important, but that's not how you solve this problem. As an inductive student, you got lots of tools in your toolbox. Sometimes you do a timeline. Sometimes you make a list. Sometimes you draw a picture. What might you do in order to say, I don't exactly know what that word. I did do a word study. Did you do a word study on the word nave? What is a nave?
Temple, sanctuary, worship complex.
Okay, there you go. Nah. Okay, so my word study didn't help me. I did that too, and that didn't really resolve the problem. So when I went back to my computer and sat there and said, what can I do to figure this out? Because Celeste is going to ask me again, and I won't be able to answer her. Or one of my students is going to ask, and I won't be able. You know what I did? I went to a different translation. Ding, ding, ding. You guys, use your translation. We just actually talked about this, I think, last week, too. Okay, I'm going to read my other this is in the NIV, which normally I don't like NIV, but for this purpose, it simplifies things. You read along, chapter 41. I'm going to read just maybe the first few verses here and let you see how it does it. Then the man brought me to the outer sanctuary and measured the jambs. The width of the jambs was 6 cubits on each side. The entrance was 10 cubits, and the projecting walls on each side were 5 cubits. And he measured the outer sanctuary. It was 40 cubits long and 20 cubits wide. The entrance was 6 cubits. The projecting walls on each side were 7 cubits wide. And he measured the length of the inner sanctuary, and it was 20 cubits, and then the end of the outer sanctuary. And then he said to me, this inner sanctuary and this outer sanctuary, this is the most holy place. Okay, so what happened to me is then what do we know about the old temple? Think of what the old temple looked like. When you went into the holy place, there was the outer, right? Because you go from the temple complex, and they would come to the inner sanctuary. Right, and I'm even just thinking of the tabernacle too, but either way. And there was what was between the outer sanctuary and the inner sanctuary? A veil, that's right, the veil. And before the veil stood what? The altar of incense, right? Did you see a veil in this temple? No veil. But did you see an altar of incense? It didn't call it that, just called it an altar, which confused me too. I had to go back and forth and go, oh, there's 2 altars. There's the one outside in the square, and now there's another one inside the inner sanctuary. Okay, and I went, okay, that makes sense. So there's an altar in there, and it's called the table of the Lord. We'll see in a little bit here. But so what I have now figured out is this temple, on the inside of this temple, there are 2 rooms with just a doorway that goes between the 2 of them, but there's no veil. And the altar of incense is now inside that secondary part of that double room. But it's technically one room if you look at it that way. If you have an open archway from your dining room into your living room, it still looks like one room, right? That's what you're looking at here. And so I helped myself by going into another translation and then noting outer, inner, and that's how that's the translation that they used so that I could make a distinction rather than them using the word nave and other things, right? Which was confusing to me. Let's see.
In verse 4, it talks about the nave, and it says this is the most holy.
Yes, exactly, which is how this one concludes. This is the most holy place. Yes, so it's saying both the outer and the inner, this is the most holy place. Where before, where was the most holy place?
Just
Behind the veil in the inner, in the most holy of holies.
This is calling both of it.
Yes, because what's no longer there? The veil. What happened to the veil? It was rent from top to bottom at the time when Jesus died on the cross. So what's not in the new temple that's distinct from the old? No veil. Do you think that blew the minds of Israel at this time? And they go, whoa, wait a minute. The Holy of Holies is like wide open? Hey, what's that, dude? Yeah, that's like a real big violation of law. You can't go because as a matter of fact, access. We have opportunity to boldly enter into the throne room of God because of what Jesus did for us. Isn't this just, it's very, very cool. And if you set yourself into the context of the Jews at that time that Ezekiel is speaking to, they know there's supposed to be a veil. They're looking at this and going, I think you misunderstood. You need to go back and ask God about this because there's no veil, right? And also, by the way, when we get there, the altar of incense that's in there is also different. We're going to talk about that in a second. Well, they were absolutely probably more confused than us. We're having a problem just because the layout isn't familiar to us, right? It's not like a familiar house. You know, when you enter into your house at home, you know where things are. You know which direction to go for this and for that, and what's the easiest way to handle a bundle of laundry to get it from point A to point B. You understand that. They understood their temple. We don't. We are Gentiles, and we're thousands of years later in history. Mm-hmm.
Well, it says this is going to be in the millennial kingdom.
Yes.
So when it says there is no temple and there is no light because Jesus is the temple.
Yes.
That's in
The new heaven and the new earth. That's
So
not the
this
millennial.
is
It's the
Revelation.
new. Yes. So you've just now added eschatology on, because something follows this. There's a Gog and Magog war at the end of this 1,000-year millennial reign. And the conclusion of that Gog and Magog war is the earth burns up. And the earth gives up its dead, and the sea gives up its dead. There's a great white throne judgment, and we go into the new heaven and the new earth. That's where there is no temple, because God is our temple.
Well, there's another thing confusing to me about this is the bodies of the kings buried in the temples.
Okay, we're not there yet, but I have to,
I never read it.
it's just talking about the defilement of what they were doing about things, I think. But what chapter are you talking about? Did you read beyond? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, it was either 41 or 42.
Oh, it was, okay. Did anybody mark that or look at that? I didn't see it either. Okay, so we'll cover it later, Carol, okay? All right, let's go back to 41. Let's get this done real quick. This one shouldn't take long either. 41, where are we now? What did you title this part of your? Yep. The most holy place. And for those of us who are New Testament, we call this the Holy of Holies, right? But we've now determined the distinction of this Holy of Holies is there's no veil that separates the two compartments of the holy place and the most holy place. It's one room, okay? So 1 to 4, what did you title that paragraph?
Measurements of the holy place.
Yeah. Okay, let's put it that way. Measurements of the most holy place. Okay. Did I get all this? The porches. We're trying to underline everything so we keep the titles well distinguished. Okay, and within this part, 1 through 4, we see that word nave used, and we've already talked about what that means. It just means that it's a temple, a sanctuary, a place of worship. In other words, it's the holy place. And the inner sanctuary, which we would refer to as the Holy of Holies, is spoken of there. And what's not there, and you might want to make a note to yourself, is no veil between these two areas, okay? Because that's distinct, and I think they would have caught it for sure, and we should also. Now we're going to look at 5 to 11. What do we see given to us there about this holy inner temple, the most holy of holies?
A lot about the side chambers.
Yeah, walls, side chambers, platform of the temple. What else? Temple. Oh, a second story, a raised platform all around. And then it talks about some free space. Okay, the free space just means there's nothing there. It's walkable area, right? Okay, so 5 to 11, then it's stuff. Walls, side chambers. And platform of temple. Okay? That just gives you some details about it. 30 side chambers in 3 stories. of 6. Each story got wider above one another. That one was complicated. You have to see it on the visual, which you'll have. The chambers surround the temple. There was free space. In other words, I think it's speaking of walking area, and there's nothing in there. One access door to the north and one to the south. That one confused me a little bit. Did anybody figure that part out? Because we know that there's no veil between the one and the other, but apparently on the sides there's doors to come in and out of that room, that area. Okay, so 5 to 11. So then now, this one got complicated too. Did you notice? There's a verse 15a and verse 15b, because subject matter changes. Did you catch that? Verses 12, what are we talking about? From 12 to 15a, what are we talking about?
Building that was in front,
Yeah, it's a building that's located where?
front of us separated.
On the west side of the temple, right. So remember I told you that, and you've got your visual, we got a north gate, a south gate, and an east gate, but there's no gate on the west wall. But on the back side of that west wall, there's this other separate building that's being spoken of here, correct? Okay, so 12 to 15a, then there's a separate building. On the west side of the temple. And on your drawings, it's made pretty simple for you. It's toward the west, it's a separate building, and it has a gallery on each side of the building. But that only takes you through 15a. Then 15b, all the way to 17, is another one, another section of this. Where are you now? The inner nave, meaning the holy place, or the Holy of Holies, or the holy place and the Holy of Holies is the nave, okay, in this case. The nave, the inner nave, and what else is talked? Porches and porches of the court. Okay, the inner nave and the porches of the court. So inside and outside, what do you see in verses 16 and 17? That was interesting. Latticed windows. How? And it says they were covered, though. What is it talking about? What is everything covered with in this section?
Cherubim.
That's the decorative part, but what is the walls covered with? Wood. Isn't that interesting? There's wood paneling. You thought it was out of style? It's back in. There's wood paneling on every wall, everywhere. Interesting. Inside and outside, covered with wood. 16 and 17, look at that with me. The threshold, the lattice windows. Now, when it talks about lattice windows, think about wooden lattice. You know what a lattice is? It lets sunlight through, but it's a wooden. We sometimes have had those in the past. Wooden lattice that cover the windows, decorative. It almost looks Victorian or Gothic or something. It looks like from the Middle Ages. And it was carved, all the wood was carved with cherubim and palm trees. A palm tree was between the cherub and the cherubim, and every cherub had 2 faces, a man's face toward the palm tree on one side and a young lion's face toward the palm tree on the other side. They were carved on all the house all around. From the ground to above the entrance, cherubim and palm trees were carved, as well as on the wall of the nave. Woo! So you're talking inside and out wood. The wood is carved with palm trees and cherub. And the windows are even covered. Thresholds, galleries, windows, all covered with panel and wood. What happened?
Because at the doctor, there's a problem with the baby.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, well, we'll lift up a prayer for you on that one. You guys don't let me forget. We'll pray when we conclude. And the Lord, He already heard the prayer. It's already gone. We'll drive careful, no speeding. because I know how it is when you get scared like that. You start going crazy. Okay, so let me stop real quick and cover with you some of this information then about the palm trees, why the palm trees, why the cherub. I don't know if she's going to take us into this next week or not, but I have some stuff. This will get you started. If you want to go do your own research, you can. Symbolisms of palm trees. It's massive in Scripture. Often associated with beauty, fruitfulness, and prosperity. Symbols of victory, righteousness, and prosperity. Also, culturally, it was significant to them in biblical times. It's also cultural. It's also significant to us even in our own lives. Experiences for us, just as it would have been for them, when you saw palm trees out in the middle of the desert, what did you know? Water and resources for food and a place of comfort, basically almost like a little paradise, as we would call it, right? An oasis of peace and abundance. That's what it conveys. Providing shelter and sustenance then for those who are traveling. We know that the palm trees are huge providers of date palms are one of the ones. I put a post on my Facebook page for those of you who are interested. Go into my Facebook page. Did you see it? You did. Good. And there's a new date palm that has been basically resurrected from the dead. They found when they found the 𝐂𝐸𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐸 digs, watch the video, it'll explain it better. But they took these that have not been around for thousands of years, and they were able to hydrate them and begin to plant seeds, and they've now grown date trees from seeds that were dated to Jesus' days. These seeds are that old. Now they have their date palms back in Israel, which is just so cool. And the only reason I posted that is I found it interesting when I was studying so much about palm trees and the significance of them and how they're on the walls everywhere in the sanctuary. So you might want to watch it. It's just a for fun video to watch. Just as the palm tree stands tall and strong, so too shall the righteous stand firm in their faith and their convictions. So there's a spiritual quality or meaning behind this, right? Symbolizes Jesus' victory over sin and death also, fulfilling the prophecies of the Old Testament, ushering in a new era of salvation for humanity. Palm trees represent righteousness, uprightness, spiritual growth, and fruit bearing. A symbol of triumph, military victories, and also it was also used in religious ceremonies. Do you guys remember when you saw palm trees in what do you know? Palm Sunday. When Jesus first came, what did they do? They waved palms before him as an act of worship and as recognizing him as King of Kings. What do you see in the Revelation when you're in the temple room? They're waving palms in that time too. So palm trees apparently are symbolic for worship. They're symbolic for righteousness, for victory. Even in the cultural things that Israel and other nations on earth have done for years, palm branches have been used to wave in victory for different kinds of things. Song of Solomon, here's a verse in 7:6-9. How beautiful and how delightful you are. He's speaking through imagery to his love, right? My love and all your charms. Your stature is like a palm tree. Your breasts are like its clusters. So the imagery is there of the palm tree being compared. Psalm 92:12-13 is a metaphor. The righteous man will flourish like the palm tree. He will grow like a cedar in Lebanon, planted in the house of the Lord. They will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still yield fruit in old age. That's so cool. So think of it. In our old age, in the millennial temple, and we'll definitely be in old age, but we'll have a renewed body. I hope it's 20, so I have got good vigor. But we are still going to be bearing fruit, and that symbolically is part of this message. They shall be full of sap and evergreen. To declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. So in other words, the vigorous growth, longevity, utility, fragrance, beauty of these noble trees exemplify the life, the character, and the destiny of the pious. Isn't that beautiful? So I'll stop there because I don't want to spend hours and hours on this, but that is part of, I also went to Got Questions to see what they had to say about these palm trees. And he says, this is about the angels. Let me go to the angels next. Okay, so that was the palm trees. So the angels, I went to got questions on this because it's a broader picture. In order for you to really get a good grip on why the cherubim would be carved all over in here, is that you really kind of have to have a topical study done on the subject of the angels, right? Which covers the bad fallen angels, but focus on the good because that's what we're looking at here. The cherubim. Well, let me just give you a couple of verses because I think the verses help you more than anything. Psalm 91, 11 and 12, for he will give his angels charge concerning you to guard you in all your ways. So this is the function of the cherubim for us, the believers, that the angels are given charge of us to watch over us, to guard us. They will bear you up in their hands that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Often we make that reference to being Jesus, but it applies to us also. Hebrews 1:14 says these cherubs, are they not all ministering spirits sent out to serve for the sake of those who will inherit salvation? Again, a rhetorical question. The answer is yes. It goes on in that. It says that we are actually higher than the angels. They serve us. This is cool. We will also judge them, by the way. 1 Peter 1:12, and I actually marked 10 to 12. You should do the whole thing. But in verse 12 it says, it was revealed to the prophets that they were not serving themselves but you in these things which now have been announced to you through those who preach the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven. Things which angels long to look into. So what you now know about angels is they are like us. They're finite beings created for a designed purpose. They're not all knowing. They're not all seeing. God sends them. God directs them. They're ministering servants to us. They're servants to God. They're interested in our salvation, and they do a work to protect us in our salvation life. So God Questions says this about them real quickly. I'm just going to read the bullets. Angels are spirits created to serve God's purposes, both for himself and for us, to serve the people God saves, to deliver messages, to wage spiritual battle, to worship God, to serve. Angels exist to do the will of their creator, to execute judgments, we've seen that in Ezekiel, and to aid in the transmission of God's word. Like, for instance, behold, I bring you tidings of good news, which shall be to all the people. Okay, so those are, I did that fast, but that's what you can find out about angels. So between the palms and the cherub, you can begin to see why they might be present all over the temple. The symbolics behind their vested interest and support in our salvation. The fact that God refers to them as sons of God, he calls us sons of God. We are all sons of God, but they are distinct from us. They're a spirit being, we're a physical flesh being, right? But they do have a vested interest, so therefore there they are in the temple, again, in a vested interest, because what is not yet done in the millennial kingdom? What is going to continue to go on in the millennial kingdom that we're doing even today?
Sinning. Sin.
Well, there's sin, yes. Evangelism. So if they're sent to serve and to be ministering servants to those who will inherit salvation, the idea that they're in the millennial temple yet symbolically to say, I'm still here to do this, is, I think, powerful to us. Okay? And they were over the ark, yes, serving God. Mm-hmm. Covering, just showing the holiness of God and separating the profane from the holy. Exactly. Okay, so we did 41. Let's go to the rest of it here. Let's go to 18. I did that little sidebar just because I wanted to break up the monotony of this. Okay, now in 18 to 20 of the most holy place are the carvings that we just talked about. Yeah, I know, and I didn't even go into that. Of inner house. They call it here the inner house, meaning holy place, right? The holy place, or the holy of holies. Inside and out, paneling, palm trees, cherub. Every cherub has two faces, face of a man, face of a lion. And you have to do some research on that if you're interested. Did anybody do that? Does anybody want to share anything about that they learned? Okay, again, inductive work. It takes you on a rabbit trail. Okay, now we're at the very last one in 41. And what do we see there? 21 to 26. This is interesting because it kind of calls it two things, right? It calls it the nave and it calls it what? It calls it the house, it calls it the nave, and it calls it the sanctuary, right? Yeah. All right, so we got all these things. So what is it, again, now at this point, we're merging all three of those qualifying names, the sanctuary, the nave, and all of them together. So again, we're talking about what place?
Holy.
The holy place. This is what we're looking at, the most holy place. We're talking about the Holy of Holies. So now in that Holy of Holies, he's talking about the nave of the sanctuary. I kind of changed my words up on the little bit, but it's the altar is addressed. And this is the altar of what? Yeah, the table that is before the Lord. So that tells you the Lord will physically be in that place, and it will be before him. So what do we know is in the Holy of Holies? Well, the Lord, but this altar. And what kind of altar is it then? It's not the sacrificial altar, right, that's out in the square. It's the altar of incense. This is where they remember, they would take coals from the burned offerings, and they would bring them by a shovel in, and they would lay them there. But before, remember, they had to go in, even to the temple before, with that pan. When they would enter behind that curtain that was there in the old one, they would back in so that they did not face the Ark of the Covenant where the mercy seat was. Why? Because an unholy man cannot be in the presence of God, of a holy God. He will be consumed. So he would back in with this coal. He would back in and he would lay the coals into that inner sanctuary. I'm not sure if he put them on something, but anyway, he went in there and he left the coals in the inner room, and then he moved himself back out, and he waited for a period of time while he did a couple of other things, and then he comes back. And by the time he comes back, the inner Holy of Holies that used to be partitioned with a veil now is filled with smoke. It represented what? What was the point to the smoke in the room?
Is it the Holy Spirit? No.
No. It was an intercessor. What it did is it protected you because it was the veil.
Oh, that's right.
And it was the intercessory work of Jesus. So symbolically, everything in the temple represents Jesus, right? Yes. So the altar of incense, where the smoke would have come from, at that time they would come in. They would put that on the altar in the inner room. Actually, they went into the Holy of Holies to do this. Put it in there so that, because that room was so well cloaked, the smoke wouldn't have gotten in there unless he moved himself into there. But he had to back in. He put it in there. I don't know if he just laid it there. They may have had a spot to put it at. I don't remember that part. But they would take it in there and allow the smoke to fill, so they had an intercessor between them and God. Then when he came back in, as the priest prepared with the blood, he would sprinkle the blood like he was instructed to do. And again, the blood represents Jesus. So, but he could come in there because of that. Well, this time now, there is no veil. But this table is still set up, which means that what are they doing with those sacrifices that are being taken care of out on the altar that's in the main square? They're bringing the coals still in, placing them on that altar, which is before the table that is before the Lord. So this is the altar of incense is still present in that Holy of Holies. A lot of things are not there, though. You know what was missing? I got this on a list. Okay. All right, well, I've got a list. I'll send it to you about the differences between Solomon's temple and this temple. One of them is there's no table of showbread. There's no candelabra. The veil is gone. The measurements of this ark are different, so just know that.
And that's in which one? Not Solomon.
I was comparing Solomon's temple to this one. To this one. I was comparing this one to Solomon's. This one, no veil. As far as I know, no candelabras. It didn't say about the lights. No table of showbread, as far as I know. So the distinction here. The other thing is the measurements of the ark. We're going to see that right here. We're almost done.
In Solomon's temple, they didn't have a place for the coals on the inside.
I don't think so, but I don't know. I don't think so. Because inside there was the Ark of the Covenant. And they had to go in there, though, to place the coals. So where they put them, I don't know. Maybe they brought them in a bucket and just left the bucket while it filled the room. I don't know. But that was Leviticus. We did that years ago. Okay, now, Ezekiel 41. Oh, 42. Yep, 42. We are moving on. Now we're at a place called the temple. And what does the temple do? What did we see in 42? What is the significance of this particular chapter?
I had a hard time with it.
Well, shall I just tell you?
Yeah,
The temple shows there's a separation
between the outer and the inner.
of the holy and the profane. Yeah, I think it did. Hold on. Verse 20. He measured it on the four sides. It had a wall all around, the length 500 in width, to divide between the holy and the profane. So that was talking about the outer wall part, but the same thing is described for us on the inner. What was one of the things that in the chambers when they would go into the inner part, when the priests would go into the inner part, which is to me is verse 1 through 14. I did not break it down as many times as they did. 1 to 14 is all about the priest's chambers, right? And the priest's chambers, according to this, says what about it? In verse 13.
They're holy chambers.
Yeah, they're holy chambers. So it's making it distinguished. And then when it talks about them, it says in verse 14, when they enter into that holy chamber, what shall they not do when they're still in dress, in their garments? The very first sentence in verse 14.
They shall not go out into the outer court from the sanctuary without laying bare their garments.
In which they minister, for
they are
the garments are holy. Literally, the garments are holy. They shall put on other garments, then they shall approach that which is for the people, which means going into the outer court. So what we're seeing here in 1 through 14 is, again, there is this huge temple. There's the outer court for the common people, but there is a select people who are distinguished and set apart, designed by God. He gets to appoint each one of us. Just like he appoints us with our spiritual gifting, he's appointed a certain people to be his ministers in his temple, and it's among the Jews of Israel. And he says, they are the ones I have chosen. Do it my way. You enter my way. And he says, when they are in the inner court, they can't just willy-nilly walk around in and out of the inner court to the outer court. When they're in the inner court, they are my holy subjects, and they are to treat everything as holy unto the Lord. What had Israel not done? They had profaned everything. When God says, if you shed blood, you cover it. What did they do? They laid it bare on the rocks, and God had compared them then to a pot that was filled with rust, and that he was going to basically put it on the fire and burn it out. Israel had not done that. Here he's showing us again. At this time in history, what will Israel do? They will do it right. Now they will be his people, and he shall be their God. And he says, when you come into the inner court, you shall be holy unto me. And you're to recognize that cognitively, just like you were to recognize blood is for the altar only. I'll bet there's going to be rules and regulations for the shedding of blood in the new millennial. We don't see that, but I'll bet there will be. Okay, so 42 then, it really comes down to, I think, 2 paragraphs. That's how I did it. Okay, that's the title of the chapter there. But I put 1 to 14. I put priest chambers, because that's what it's talking about, is all the chambers. Every paragraph that she would have had you do was about these priest chambers, different varying things about them. And I put on here both north and south, okay, are holy chambers. So there's a separation of the holy and the profane through the visual witness of the priest chambers, right? Okay. But then beyond that, then he goes to the whole temple on the whole as well, because you know what this does for you and I? It just hit me. Because we aren't going to be allowed in that inner part, I don't think, because it's designated for these people who will minister to the Lord. The priests who will minister before the Lord, yes. You and I, however, we can go into the outer court, right? Okay. Now, how do we get designated as also holy unto the Lord? Right here in this paragraph. This paragraph says in 15 to 20, what is he measuring?
He's measuring
the temple on the whole, right? Before all he did was he saw the temple, an outer wall all around. He measures the wall's thickness and height. That's all he did. He didn't go all the way around it. Yeah. Now he says this is the temple, and he measures the wall all around. All around it, I guess you could say, if you wanted to put that on there. So he says the wall's purpose in verse 20. To divide the holy and the profane. So who's the profane here? In the outside of the temple itself. So there's a temple complex that he saw. It looked like a city with a wall that goes all around it. Who's going to be on the outside? Considered the profane, meaning it's the nations that are going to be living on the earth in that day. People who may or may not be in faith, but if they're in faith, they get to come to the inner side inside the gate, right? That's how we get included as being part of the holy. Yeah. But we don't get to go into the Holy of Holies like these guys do, but we get to come into the outer court where we will worship God, where we will worship Jesus. And as such, then we become a part of the holy. I think that's really cool. The purpose is to divide the holy from the profane. We can enter the holy temple in the outer court. And I'm going to say we, meaning the common people. These are the priests. Okay, so the priests have a holy place. We have a holy place called the temple on the whole, and it separates its purpose to divide the holy and the profane. So again, there's a visual picture then for the world to look at that and say, do you want to have access to the inner temple? You must come to God in faith, and if you do, you may enter. If you do not have faith in Jesus, you are not allowed in the temple. You'll watch it from a distance until you come into faith. Same thing so again, we're back to evangelism in that 1,000-year reign. The need to evangelize will still be there. That new manna that he promised to us in Revelation, I believe, will be a new scripture that God will give to us of salvation, a salvation message. He will also include in it, I would probably, it's my hope, and I think it makes sense, he will probably tell us in that scripture about the new heaven and the new earth, yes, which we don't have much on right now. Right. Yeah. Don't you think? He'll be preparing us for that home. Like he's preparing us right now for this millennial time. I'm excited. All right, we did it. Oh, 5 minutes over. I'm sorry. Thank you, guys. Fun. Next week, we finish up lesson 5, the last 2 days. Go crazy. Anything that you have a question on these different subject matters, like the cherubim and whatever, or how many stairs and... Okay, and watch the video. It's only 12 minutes. It will be in the link that Kristen will send out. It will be very, very helpful to you before you start your next chapter homework, because it gets you around the room and solve some problems.
43 is
That's right. So you're in the next chapter. Hang on. I know.
Yeah.
I was remembering it too because I did the same thing you did. I actually went there because I messed up. But yeah. Okay. Thank you guys. See you all next time.